It's recording. We're recording. Yeah.
Go ahead. You want me to start?
Oh, okay. I'll start then. No, whatever. Okay. Welcome, Raza. This is our monthly Pláticas con el Pueblo. This month we're talking about two very important events regarding May. First of all, May Day, International Workers' Day, a day that connects all working class and oppressed people around the world. A very important day, and we'll be talking about that. And also Cinco de Mayo, a day that we remember for a Mexicano victory over then French imperialist France, which was an imperialist power. They still are, but they were on top back then, and they were defeated by forces composed of indigenous campesinos armed with machetes and rocks and a few muskets. So we find that a very, very important day to recognize as well, because it shows our anti-colonial, anti-imperialist nature to our struggle. And so those are the topics that we're going to be talking about today. I turn it over to Amado.
Could I add a couple more dates to the calendar? Also on Cinco de Mayo is the International Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Day, which is important for us to remember for our ancestors who were composed of women caught in the web of violence of colonialism, and our sisters and non-binary siblings and neighbors and relations who are continually under threat from the colonial system because of their identities as indigenous people. Also, today is May 4th, which is the Youth Day in China. It's the anniversary of the 1919 May 4th movement, which was a mass movement of young people against the feudal structure in China. And not just the feudal structure in China, but the imperialist European powers that worked with that feudal structure to maintain a non-representative form of government in China. So 1919 May 4th is an important day for us as well. So when we think about imperialism, when we think about taking the lessons of May Day and Batalla de Puebla in relation to each other, I want to spend a little bit thinking about political economy. And that sounds kind of old-fashioned and stuffy, but it's important to think about, right? What is political economy? It's the ways in which colonialism, class, gender, racialization are all kind of melded into systems of production, and the ways in which workers and their work and their working power are all regulated by capitalism or whatever mode of production is in power. But political economy is important for us to understand and know, because without political economy, we can't necessarily figure out where we are. And if we can't figure out where we are, we won't know who our friends are or who our enemies are. So we have to understand political economy as a way of these systems and how they express themselves and how they divide people into workers or managers or owners. And those are often obviously along racial, national, ethnic, and of course, gender and sexuality lines as well. So thinking about political economy and kind of the ways in which imperialism, which is what we're talking about today, in whole is formed, I think it's important to talk about kind of the precursor to imperialism, which is colonialism. Colonialism, of course, has a few different arguable starting points. Some people would put it in the 1440s to 1460s, when Iberian powers like Spain and Portugal expanded out into West Africa and to the coasts of West Africa, the Canarias. Other people, of course, will point at 1492, which is another point that is very valid. And then, of course, for Mexicanos, Mexicanas, and non-binary Mexicanes people, we have to look at 1521, right? And that's 100 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1520 and 1521, when Spanish colonizers came to mainland Mexico and began their kind of genocidal and exploitative rule, which relied on the dual kind of basis of both enslavement of Africans and importation of African as laborers and as commodities. and also the importation and enslavement all throughout Mexico of indigenous people from different parts. Now, of course, that enslavement was not necessarily the same as chattel enslavement. In some places it was, but in other places, the Spanish colonial power used systems of what they call encomienda and repartimiento systems, which were labor systems in kind paid between Spanish authorities and indigenous communities. It's really important for us to take a view that challenges the way that the story is told that focuses on Anglos, right? When we think about the history of capitalism, which is what we're talking about here, a lot of the time there's an English language idea that England was the first innovator of capitalism, no? But there's some good things to think about that Raza in Mexico, as well as people in the Caribbean and people on the west coast of Africa and the east coast of Africa, and of course out into Asia and the Indian Ocean, were some of the first people to be super exploited and proletarianized by capitalism and colonial forces. In Mexico in the 1500s, the Bajío above Mexico City, and of course Mexico City itself's dense urban center, were sites of agriculture, ranching, and industrial production with factories and other ways of making things that really resemble the beginnings of the world system of capitalism. No? So when we think about our raza in the period from 1520 to 1820, we really can think about 300 years of European colonization. And that sets up kind of a beginning process that will generate the wealth, will generate the social statuses and political economy and relations that will underline imperialism as it grows out in the late 19th century. Of course, that European colonization in Mexico was directly ended by the creation of the Mexican Republic in 1820, after a period of about 10 years of struggle and different forms of government. As a result of its independence struggle, Mexico faced Spanish economic and national oppression, both during the period of 1810 to 1820, and of course before as well. But afterwards, there was continued economic violence from not just Spain, but white supremacist European and United States pressures on Mexico. And of course, Mexico is not perfect, right? There's internal contradictions and struggles within Mexico itself. One of my favorite rebellions is the 1837 New Mexico Rebellion, where Nuevo Mexicanas rose up against a central federalized government that in Mexico that refused to grant New Mexico kind of a departmental or a state status and tried to keep it as a territory. They were proud to be Mexican citizens, and indigenous people in New Mexico, including Genizaros and Pueblo people, rose up and cut off the governor's head, saying, we demand representation as a part of a sovereign nation. So that's one way to think and remember that Raza have always been involved. And Raza, I mean, men, women, young people, non-binary people, indigenous people, mixed race people, African descent people, all throughout Mexico and what's now the Southwest, or what we understand as Aztlán, have continually involved in our own politics and our self-determinating politics as well. Batalla de Puebla is important for us to think about because it's kind of the beginning in 1862 of a French occupation in Mexico. There had been previous occupations in Mexico, of course, before, again, starting with the Spanish, but by 1846, the United States invaded Mexico. England also invaded Mexico at a certain point under punishment for debt. Spain, again, kept its neo-colonial kind of clause into Mexico and both politically and economically repressed Mexico. And then, of course, in 1862, we have the French invasion of Mexico, which Batalla de Puebla was a part of. Batalla de Puebla is notable not because they repulsed the French entirely. They did beat the French, but the French managed to stay in Mexico until 1867, when Mexican Republican sovereignty was returned under Benito Juarez. Even after that, though, debt and control of Mexico's kind of sovereign debt, of the national debt, and the way that Mexico produced continued, not just by the US, but also England, very importantly. Of course, the US, England, France, Germany, and other European powers use their colonies and use their power, even if they weren't directly in colonies in the case of Mexico, but use their leverage and power of debt and financial capital throughout the Americas, Africa, and Asia in that period to create their wealth and to transition into what is identified as imperialism, as the kind of financial securement that they would do within their countries and then send out into colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This is really a part of the tricontinental history, which our comrades in the Cuban Revolution have talked about extensively and talked about the tricontinental solidarity between the colonized people of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. It's really important to remember that this is a global system that we exist in and that Raza have been involved with since the 1500s, right? There were people from Asia, people from Africa, indigenous people going to Europe and other places as well from this continent, and it connects us, and we can highlight it by remembering our history. And of course, Cinco de Mayo has a certain weight in the US as a drinking holiday, as a kind of frivolous holiday, no? But in reality, when we think about it, those drinking reasons and those things are in there because if you really say, yes, this is a day where we celebrate a European army getting beaten by a bunch of indigenous people and African descent people, that's not going to go. So it's really important to kind of think about these connections between imperialism, colonialism, and the kind of formations of capitalism that really come out in connection to Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, I really like how you connected all that, bro. That was a lot of good knowledge you just dropped, man. But I think it's really important that you talk about political economy, you know, because usually, you know, and it's part of that process of learning and education and consciousness raising. But you know, a lot of raza that get involved, they don't understand that, you know, and they tend to think, you know, oh, you know, we're fighting racism. That's it. You know, we're fighting to make things better. You know, and you know, there's this underlying, like you said, there's these economic reasons for the things that happen. You know, it's not just they just didn't happen because bad people were doing bad things to good people or you know whatever. You know, there's you know material reasons for why things have happened and why they continue to happen the way they do. And I think that's what we, you know, as scientific socialists are trying to make our raza understand, man. You know that, you know, all these ideas that we talk about, you know, all these words that we say, you know, they're not just empty words and slogans and stuff. You know, there's meaning behind it. You know, you know, just like you know, like you're mentioning right now. You know, colonialism. You know, colonialism happened because there was a you know economic incentive by you know these invaders. You know, it wasn't because they literally thought that they just wanted to, you know, make everybody Christian or Catholic, etc. You know, that was one of their weapons that they used. You know, but they had an economic reason behind it. The same reason that they brought people from Africa over here and made them slaves. You know, it wasn't just because they were evil people and they're lazy or whatever. You know, they needed workers, and what better for them, you know, to get a bunch of people and treat them, the people themselves, like you said, like commodities themselves. You know, that's horrible. I mean, it is evil, but there's a reason, you know, an economic reason behind it. You know, it's not just bad people, you know, and I think that's real good that you bring that up, because we need to understand, you know, materially why things happen, you know, because if we don't, then we're not going to find, you know, actual solutions to the things that affect us, and we can't connect them to, you know, to the broader world, you know, like you said, you know, I mean, there's this whole connection between, for example, Chicanos, Mexicanos, raza here, and Filipinos, you know, and it's part of the whole, you know, colonization that Spain had of here and Las Filipinas and other countries, you know, and you know that connects us, you know, but there's that economic basis to it, you know, but you know, I just think, you know, that's real good that you brought that up, you know. I mean, it's not just, you know, that we're either, you know, just celebrating or commemorating or you know, lamenting, you know, but we're analyzing, you know, because we want to find solutions.
They're scared. When I say they, I mean capitalists and their whole allied class array. They're terrified of thinking about the fact that indigenous and African or Black people and Asian people around the world, but also in their colonies, are the most socially advanced pieces of our existence. And that comes from our exposure to being working class people in their system. No?
Mm-hmm.
The consciousness and kind of the genius of Marx and other scientific socialists like Lenin and Stalin comes from the idea of observing life and the conditions that exist under capitalism. No? So thinking from this early stage of capitalism into this imperialist stage of capitalism, the most consistent pieces of challenge to that system have been indigenous people, have been colonized people from the world around us. And right, every system needs to reproduce itself and continually be working, right? The biggest threat to the reproduction of capitalism is us, is indigenous people from the Americas, is African people all over the world, is Asian people who obviously are extremely successful in the case of China, in case of People's Korea, in case of Vietnam, who have stood up and sacrificed so much to fight and to challenge this white supremacist global system. No? And, you can get into a lot of kind of the moralistic stop Asian hate and or other kind of slogans or liberal movements that atomize out these things that say, oh, this is only one people's problem, or oh, this is just a problem of perception, or it's just a problem of lack of representation, or we need to be going into a multicultural mode. But what we really need to do, and I was just listening to the Red Nation podcast the other day, and they were talking about this same kind of point, is that the real underlying threat is our national sovereignty, our self-determination, our ability to say, no, we're not going to exist in this kind of system. And we're going to train ourselves to kind of think about it critically, create our own theorization, create our own political practices, create our parties that are resistant to this, and move forward and struggle.
Exactly.
You mentioned, Amado, earlier that May 5th is the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Awareness Day, right? And I think that people don't stop to think how that's tied to capitalism as well, right? So I'm thinking about the national the murders on indigenous reservations, Native American reservations in North America is 10% the national average. And I was thinking more about in Tamaulipas, right, where the maquiladoras came into effect, and just in 2020 there was 4,000 women murdered in along the border, right, in Tamaulipas, and that's all based. It's there's a clear delineation between when maquiladoras come into communities, and the rate of murder women goes up immediately, right? So it's all in the name of capitalism and improvement and money, right? And so I just challenge people who are listening to us today to think about some of these movements, our grassroots movements that come out of communities that are trampled on, and have maquiladoras and big companies come in and establish themselves, and then when they find somewhere else cheaper to move to, they've decimated the area. There's no more employment in the area after those companies move out. But some of these movements arise around and in opposition to these capitalist systems that come into the area, and we don't think about it like that, right? So people are thinking about just, they're missing women, and we're calling attention and awareness to that. But what is the cause of it? What is causing these women to be killed and murdered, all in the name of capitalism?
Definitely. And, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls movement also directly engages with energy production, right? With the man camps and stuff in places like Wyoming, the Dakotas and Montana, where men are brought in for energy booms, for oil and petroleum booms. And those camps are very violent places, and they're sexually violent places. And this is like the extractive kind of hand of capitalism, right? It's the extractive hand of the white supremacist kind of overall system that capitalism lives off of, right? That some people might say, oh, well, there's capitalism that isn't racist or isn't racialized, but it doesn't exist as far as I know, right? And we can see its history everywhere. And that history means making women subject to, and women and non-binary and well, trans and cis women subject to violence and colonial violence, replicating itself to maintain its kind of structure base of violence and fear to continue to manage itself, right? We can't divorce ourselves from these issues, no? And you know, some people might talk about being class reductionist or might focus on identity in some ways, but I don't think that you can separate any of them once you really think about how these kind of complex bundle of factors are all in there, right? So we have to think about this in our analysis. We have to think about all of these things, and we can't silence it, right? We have to like think and evaluate what the different aspects of this array of mechanism are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you know, lots of people go around talking about intersectionality like it's something that was just recently discovered. And, you know, certainly it's important, but I mean, thinking about it in that way, like these first analysis of these first critiques of capitalism that were coming forward in the 1800s, and even continuing on till now. I mean, this is really the foundation in a lot of ways of that whole way of thinking about it. Because you're right, Amato. You can't separate these things out from each other. I mean, if we go back to the beginning, to these first contacts, you know, there are, while there are many similarities, there's some real fundamental differences between Spanish colonization of the Africas and Spanish colonization of the Americas. The number one being that the Spanish were always aware of Africa as a continent, right? Like it's right there by them. And they were, you know, they had actually been colonized themselves for, you know, 700-800 years by people from Northern Africa. And so they were very aware of their existence. The same isn't true here in the Americas. There was a real debate that took place after the initial contact, and that debate was centered on our humanity primarily. Were we human beings? Were the people that they found in these lands human beings? And as a result of that, were they subject to or benefactors of? Could they be benefactors of Christ's sacrifice? Right. I mean, this is a debate that raged for 50 years into the discovery of the new world, or the quote unquote new world. And so, I mean, when you think about that, I mean, what it does, it sets the stage for all of the things that we're talking about right now, because what's still being debated 500 years later, 450 years later, however you want to call it, right, is our humanity. That's still what's being debated, right? Yeah. Are we really people? Do we deserve the protections of the law, right? Do we deserve to be able to benefit from the work that we do? I mean, it's a fascinating conversation. I think starting it off with political economy is a very good way to do it, because the more that everybody tries to separate these issues out from each other, right, the more we see how we become fractured, right, to the point where we're not actually able to mount a credible defense. I mean, even if when people start talking about sovereignty, I mean, I understand why we have that conversation. I have conversations about sovereignty and self-determination, but we have to pretend practice that before it's ever going to happen. Because to try to claim as an indigenous person that we have sovereignty somewhere in the Americas, I mean, that's not what's happening here right now. And so, but thinking about how it is that we practice it, right? And we do that through building structures like the Rasa Unida Party, through other forces like that. I think that's the important part, but always to keep in mind that what we're asserting is our humanity.
Absolutely. And that humanity is denied by capitalism, right? Capitalism creates labor as a commodity. Who labors? Humans, right? So they're continually in this process of commodification. Of course, the commodification of chattel slavery, the commodification through encomienda and repartimiento, all really kind of point to this later 19th century explosion of capitalism that's really shaped our modern world. Marx says in Capital, in his chapter on primary accumulation, he says the rosy dawn of capitalism was created with the mass enslavement and conquest of indigenous people in the Americas, with the closing of ports and the monopolization of trade in Asia and Asian trading ports, and with the hunting of human beings in West Africa, right? Marx puts it right there. And in that seed, we can see all of us, all of our faces, all of our relatives' faces, all of our ancestors' faces as the seed, as the basis of understanding this 500-year history that takes us through this early kind of colonial period into this period of super profits, of financial monopolization within countries, and then them needing to create monopolies throughout Asia, Latin America, and Africa to monopolize production, to monopolize output, to monopolize even pulling resources out of that country, but also to monopolize kind of the political landscape of that country, to create racial and gender structures that match their kind of European, their 19th century and 20th century kind of myopic, or I'm sorry, I don't mean myopic in an ableist way, but they're short-sighted, kind of limited, racist, sexist, homophobic kind of structures, right? And these things that people have taken into them and used as like defining principles, once you really kind of sit back and look at it, you're like, why do I believe that? Why do I think that? Why do I think, people, I'm going to use gender here, people say, oh, there's only two genders. Why do you think that? Because we know that even if you live experience, that there are people who have a spectrum of gender identities, expressions, and beings, right? And we know that from our lives, but then there's this overwhelming kind of ideology that robs people who are not maybe binary of their humanity, because it's helpful for capitalists to regulate the ways that people reproduce and ways that people have relations to each other, no? Yeah. So it's so interesting to think about. And it's also really scary and saddening too, right? To think about the way that this order is kind of created and continued under these different auspices, no? And Batalla de Puebla, the way that it's celebrated, right? I don't drink, but I know a lot of people use it, Cinco de Mayo, to go get drunk. And that's itself a commodification, right? That's beer companies and liquor companies in the US being like, we'll use it, right? Yeah. So we can see it even in the replication of something like holidays, or the way that we structure our labor in the household. All those things are factors.
Exactly.
And they're reflections of these systems.
Even
the diamond, the creation of the wedding band, right, with a diamond in it, and how all that had, it was a marketing ploy by the diamond companies, De Beers, and to make sure that the prices never dropped, and then in fact they go up, right? And when you buy a diamond, the value of it goes down, because you try to resell it after you buy it, you can't sell it at the same price that you bought it for. So that whole, and it creates this horrible situation for people that are mining these they're called blood diamonds. I mean, so
kids.
Absolutely, kids. Yep.
And that goes back to the period of creation of imperialism, the 1870s, what they call the scramble for Africa, right? The different European powers partitioned Africa. Why? Because they felt like they could, right? So Belgium got pieces, Germany got pieces, Italy got pieces, France got pieces, and England got pieces. And England happened to get those Southern African pieces that had a lot of diamonds, right? Cecil Rhodes is the guy who kind of oversees that. And there ends up being a whole country, quote unquote. It's not a real country, it's a colonial imposition called Rhodesia, right? And now it's called Zimbabwe. And thankfully it was liberated. And we can talk about neocolonialism and the continuity of the colonial presence, right? But those diamond mines exist, and the wedding ring exists because of this big, massive worldwide movement of capital, monopoly, to serve English interests, right? It's like,
In,
it's not inescapable. We can do something about it, but we have to see it first.
yeah. And I think that, you know, that's a real interesting point that you bring up about how the scramble for Africa, you know, because it makes it makes me think, you know, about how in all this, you know, process, you know, new nations are formed, you know, and other nations that existed, you know, they die away or they become other ones, or they, you know, and through all these processes, even if, like you said, they're imposed on people, but then those nations are liberated and they become something new, you know. That's what we mean when we talk about Aslan, you know. We don't mean, you know, I mean, there's a whole romantic, you know, part of it, the whole, you know, spiritual part of it. That's all beautiful, you know. But when we talk about it, we're talking about actual material fact, you know, like the fact that, you know, the United States invaded and they took over this top portion of what was Mexico, and obviously, you know, indigenous lands. But then they also needed labor. They didn't want as many Mexicans, because Mexicans are Indians. That's why they didn't take the rest of Mexico. But they still needed labor in the Southwest. Who was going to do that labor? Mexicanos. I mean, including the Chicanos and the tribes that were here. You know, many who were also in between being the tribe and being Mexicano, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't the people power that they needed for, you know, for all the agriculture and building the cities. So they hypocritically, you know, they create these factors that pulled in millions and millions of our raza, you know, to migrate. You know, I never call our people immigrants, but they migrate here, you know, and, you know, we built the cities, we harvested the lands, we did all this and that. And then yet they want to pretend that we don't exist, and because it serves their interests. It serves their interests that this mass of proletarians, this mass of indigenous proletarians have no identity, have no attachment to the land, feel that we are insignificant. Like Mireles just said, we're still, you know, debating or talking about our very own humanity, you know, in this country, you know, that was imposed on us, you know. So when we talk about Islam, we're talking about these material factors that have actually created this nation or this potential nation in you know, these lands, you know, taken from Mexico and other indigenous tribes, you know. We're not just talking about, you know, our ancestors and this and that. Obviously, that has a lot to do with it, but there's material basis to what we're talking about when we say Aslan, you know. And yeah, I mean, like, for example, here I always like to bring up the Central Valley of California. You know, the Central Valley of California, they even call it the cornucopia of the world, the salad bowl of the world, you know. And who does all that labor? Historically, who does all that labor? The majority is raza, you know, and it's amongst the poorest parts of the country, you know. But what better for you know, the capitalists to have this millions and millions of people, you know, that sweat and bleed and make that possible, make that chunk of the earth the 15th largest economy ever, you know. What better is it for them, for these people to not have any identity at all, you know, and feel like, well, we're just workers and that's it, you know. We can't complain about anything, you know, because we're here, you know. We should be grateful, you know, quote unquote. And that mentality goes on through generations, even if you've been here forever. You know, I gotta be grateful because look, they taught me about the Mexicans in Mexico. That's really bad down there. I should be grateful I'm here, that I have 500 Cokes that I could buy, you know, or whatever, you know. All, you know, this false sense of freedom, supposedly, you know. So yeah, man. I mean, I you know, that's very fascinating, and these are, you know, the issues that we want people to understand and analyze. You know, like when this is what we're talking about. You know, this is the, you know, political economy answers a lot of these things. You know, and it makes us understand things that might happen. You know, again, because they know it. You know, there's that one paper, the Hispanic Challenge by what's that? I forgot that guy's name. Christopher
Huntington, Samuel Huntington.
Samuel Huntington. Yeah, I always want to say Christopher. Samuel Huntington. You know, this guy. You know, the guy that founded the Trilateral Commission. He was on I forgot which administration, the Johnson administration, one of those. And, you know, so he's he's not a nobody. You know, and this guy, you know, he wrote this whole paper about how raza, you know, are not like all these other, you know, quote unquote immigrant groups, because we have this sense of attachment to the land, and we have this where our culture is so tied already to the Southwest that we're not integrating the way they would want us to integrate. We maintain our culture, we maintain our language, even if it changes and all that, but we maintain it over generations and generations. And that, that, like you say, that sparks fear in the dominant society that, these people are not becoming Americans. You didn't want us to be Americans in the first place, but now they're scared because there's way more of us, and these hands like these, have built these cities, and created the vast wealth of this land, but they want us to not know that. They want us to pretend it's insignificant. That way they keep exploiting us, and it's convenient, but it's just, fascinating how we could use the scientific method to understand our condition,
But I think that, part of it also is understanding that, everything changes, right? Nations rise, nations fall. Peoples merge together, and then they become a different people, a new type of, nationality, or they become citizens of a new government or whatever. I mean, that process is inevitable, right? And so I think that once we begin to, embrace that and understand it, what we also begin to really understand is that, even who we are as a people, it's going to change. I hear people saying all the time that, they have kids and that their kids aren't as Chicano as they were, and I'm not really sure what that means, to be real honest with you, because, I mean, you think about it, even for like white people in the United States, right? I mean, are white people in the United States now like they were in the 1950s? I mean, they're not, right? But they don't go around challenging each other's whiteness because of it, or saying that they're not really American because or the 20s, right? I mean, so it's that change. Like when we get back to thinking about, what does it mean? What does materiality even mean to begin with, right? And in understanding that a large part of what it means is that, that it changes, that it transforms itself, right? Like that's what Mao was talking about when he's saying that the process of the contradiction or the dialectic in through these processes transformed always into its complete opposite, right? Even thinking of in that term, what we have is what we have is a this moment, right, where we exist, perhaps.
I think we lost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
one of the places that we want to engage our audience, right, is to come to our study groups that we have on Wednesday nights at 4 p. Sorry, remind me what 4 p.m. Ya ni me acuerdo a qué horas es.
5 p.m. Pacific.
5 Pacific, 4 Mountain. Wait, no, 6 Mountain, 7 Central, 8 Eastern.
And the reason I say that is because it reminds me of a quote. Everything we've been talking about is in terms of dismantling our self-identity and not identifying or being rooted in our native history, right? Is then you become an easy target to assimilation and embracing the ideals of the capitalist system. It's very easy to fall into that lie. But I think about we need to learn how to love ourselves, right? Because the love of our people has to be greater than the hate for our enemy, right? And so no, and even after that, you don't have to hate the enemy, or you just have to love the people. You have to love the work that you're doing, and by educating yourself and learning about the things that we've been talking about today, right? It's only through study groups and analyzing documents that we've analyzed and talking about what a dialectic is, right? What scientific strategies are, so that we can analyze the history that we've had. So I just want to encourage everybody to join La Raza Unida Party study groups on Wednesday nights.
Yeah, I mean, once we see the fact that we, us, our tricontinental comrades, our working class comrades all around the world, we've made the future. You know, like people always say, well, what's going to happen after capitalism? Oh, you want to end capitalism? What's the next question? You know, it's been answered. It's been answered all over the world by people decolonizing, no? And they started, like you said, by studying with each other and taking each other's thoughts seriously, and remembering that our thoughts and our perspectives are valid. Our humanity, Ernesto Mireles was talking about, is valid, right? And you know, that comes from studying together, that comes from working together. Yeah, our study groups are great. Not to self-promote too much, but you know, I love it. I always learn more. I always come away with a good positive feeling, and thinking about the solidarity and the insights that we create together.
I'm sorry, you guys.
Oh,
That's cool.
I was thinking about this past one where one of the study group members was talking about not embracing fully the term Chicana, right? And I don't know what her thought process afterwards, but I think there was a lot of engaging communication or conversation about each individual's coming to that term and embracing that term, right? And I think that, to me, that's coming to love your people and coming to love the movement, and you know, learning that you don't have to necessarily um, you know, do without other identities that you have to embrace the word Chicano or Chicana, and to embrace La Raza Unida and what we're trying to do here, you know, and what we're trying to put together. So there's a lot of great conversation that comes out of those, and a lot of growth that comes out of the study groups. Sorry, Todd, were you going to?
No, I was just going to apologize and just say I tried as well as I could to be a part of the conversation, but with you know, now that Jessica and I have both gotten our vaccines, which I would strongly recommend anybody listening to this, if they're able to get their vaccine, to get it. We allowed our 14-year-old to go back to school, and so Tuesdays are her late days. So I was picking my child up from school, which is something that I haven't really done in about a year. So I'm starting to reintegrate that practice into my life right now. So yeah. That's all I was going to say. Just apologize.
It's all good.
Since we usually have this live, we answer questions, but since we weren't able to do the live this time, should we just encourage people to go ahead and write some questions in the comments here, and we'll try to respond to them as we can. I would love to hear from anybody listening to this conversation, thoughts, inspirations, insights that you have.
Yeah, I think also too that you know, and maybe you guys were saying this when I came back on, but you know, this is the type of conversation that we have weekly in the Raza Unida study group. And so, I mean, if this is the conversation that you've been looking for, the one that you're interested in having, then you should sign up. Go to our webpage, which is razaunida.com. Is that right?
RazaUnidaParty.org.
That was not right in any way, shape, or form what I just said. RazaUnidaParty.org. No wonder I could never find it at first. All right. And sign up for the study group and come and you know, have this discussion with us, man. Be part of that transformation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Chicanos are transforming all over the country. I mean, and we've been transforming, and we're going to continue, I think, to transform until we become the opposite of what we've been. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. So join us, join the study group.
Yeah, join the study group. All right. End it. 1, 2, 3.
All right. Ándale.
Still recording.
Get a quick que viva la raza.
Que viva.
Oh, yeah. Que viva la raza.
Que viva la
Que
raza.
viva.
Ándale.